Well, now having seen that tremendous thematic first game, we now come to a second game which I think is actually the equal of the first game in terms of educational value, and another very thematic performance by White. And it comes from a tournament played in Vienna in 2012 between the woman Grandmaster Regina Pecorna from Slovakia, and she's playing Julia Novkovic. The opening moves, well, they were quite interesting because White went into this variation via a centre game. Pecorna is obviously not afraid in this position that Black can play Bishop C5. She's happy to play the Scotch Gambit or Bishop B4. Well, if that's your cup of tea, you can play this way. But I personally think that Black's chances are okay after Bishop C5. Nevertheless, Novkovic plays Knight F6, and now we conveniently go into our main line with E5. And once again, Black plays D5. Bishop B4, Bishop B5, excuse me, Knight E4, Knight takes D4, and this way around, Black plays the aggressive move here, Bishop C5, and that's Black's other choice in this position as opposed to Bishop D7. And that's quite an interesting move because it looks as though White can take on C6. Frankly, I'm not even going to go into that variation because I think it's too risky. Black gets a massive attack if White takes on C6. That's all you need to know. And the graveyards are full of White players who have gone grabbing that material. The point is that White, when he takes on C6, is getting ready to exchange off all his developed pieces. So whilst he might nab the exchange on A8, he falls prey to a crushing Black attack. No, instead Bishop E3 is a thematic move, getting ready for our usual idea of Bishop takes C6. Now I think it is definitely a threat to take on C6. So Black normally plays Bishop D7, and now we get a position very similar to the last game, except the moves Bishop E3 and Bishop C5 have been injected into the position. So castles, castles brings us to a very familiar situation, and now White goes F3. So here we see once again that White has got this useful pawn majority which she's trying to mobilise. The move F3 is probably a prelude to F4 a little later on. En passant, she moves the knight to what she hopes will be a bad square on G5. But also, White's got the easy plan in this particular position of trying to dominate the squares D4 and C5. And the way she can go about doing this is to try and exchange off the dark square bishops. Let's just see how this might be done. So Black played Knight G5, the only square for the knight. Pecorna hit the knight came back to E4, and now Knight to D2. White has no need to play Knight C3 this time, as the knight on D4 is protected, so Knight D2 is a good move. And because of White's better pawn structure, you see White can confidently exchange pieces. Exchanges favour White in this position. Knight takes D2. Well, as I mentioned in the notes, Black could reinforce the knight with F5. That's a move which definitely comes into consideration. But you have to say that White has now inherited a protected pass pawn on E5. So there should be some way to gain an advantage, even if it's only a tiny advantage here. And I think C4 is a good move in this situation, putting the question to Black's pawn structure and keeping up the pressure. A couple of lines here. If Black takes on D2 and then takes on C4, then I think we can go Queen C2. And Black's pawn structure is ruined. If Black angles for some sort of drawing idea with Bishop takes D4, then we have Queen takes C4 check, and then Queen takes D4. Yes, there are opposite colour bishops on the board, but White has just got a winning position, I would say, here. Well, if not winning, then it's extremely uncomfortable for Black because of his many, many weak pawns. So just running this variation one more time, if F5 C4, if Black just holds the position with Queen to E7, then we can take on E4, F takes E4, and now Rook to C1. And again, this position is shaping up to be better for White. You see, White's got this permanent advantage here of this protected passed pawn. And because this pawn is impossible for Black to shift Black's going to have to spend the whole game manoeuvring around it in order to try and get counterplay. And I think that's a thankless task in this particular situation. Finally, f5. What else can be played? c4. If bishop b6, then we can go takes, b4, threatening to shut in the bishop. And if d takes c4, then queen c1 is a nice move. Again, threatening to take on c4 with a better endgame. And I don't think there's a great deal Black can do about it. The point of queen c1 was to keep this bishop protected, so Black couldn't play some cheapo move like bishop e6. So those small variations give you a flavour of the type of pressure White can bring to bear. So Novkovic took on d2, Pokorna took back with the queen, and now Black hits the pawn on e5 with f6. You can see what she's trying to do. She's trying to break up and isolate that pawn on e5. She's going to take on e5, messing up the white pawns, and then she's going to try and bombard White's isolated pawn. The endgames might not be so good for White now if there's an isolated pawn on e5. So let's just see what happened. Pokorna played a very good move now. Nice timing, knight to b3, another typical move in this type of position. And I think now Black commits almost a game-losing mistake. She takes on e3, which of course helps White to dominate these two squares, c5 and d4. This is the point of the variation, this particular line. If White can get a grip of this type, then Black will surely be in trouble. We're going to get to a good knight versus bad bishop situation. What should Black do? Well, after knight b3, I think White's better anyway. Black should probably play bishop b6, and then I think bishop c5. And it's very, very difficult for Black to avoid becoming worse in this position. There's a tricky move here, queen to e7. Optically very attractive because White can't take the queen, but then I think queen e3. White's keeping the edge. Going back to bishop c5, if Black tries to go through with her plan of isolating this pawn and then playing queen e7, hitting the pawn with rook a8, then I think we just go rook takes f8 check, and then rook e1. Again with the typical position. White's definitely better. But perhaps it's not an advantage which is as large as the one Pokorna is about to get in the game. Well, maybe that's what Black should have done. Black didn't do that. She took on e3, and her choice confirms the idea that this is very much a practical choice for White. White is posing Black uncomfortable positional problems, and not everyone is going to get it right. So Novkovic took, isolating the pawn, captured, and then played rook to e8. But Black is just clearly worse in this position. Now Pokorna, pragmatically, played queen takes a7, settling for an outside passed pawn. She knows she's giving up this trump of the pawn on e5, but White has inherited other advantages instead. Just dropping back, she could have tried knight c5 in this position, and just the consolidating move, rook e1. To me, this looks like a very worthwhile alternative method of play. And Black's position is very difficult. Bishop is ineffective, hits the pawn on c2, White can protect. White has a very clear-cut, dark squared strategy in this position, and whilst this position is not winning for White, it's again one of those situations which is extremely uncomfortable for Black. So if Black tries to bail into some sort of endgame, we just bring the king up, and then something like h4. Black can't repair all the defects in her position. But Pokorna, okay, she chose to take on a7, giving up the pawn. Queen comes back excuse me, to f2, threatening queen f7 check. And Novkovic played bishop e6. And just to show you how plausible this whole game, this whole variation has been, I highlight in the notes a couple of examples where other Black players have come this way and been defeated. For instance, in the game Sekulic versus Bojic, Pula 1990, Black played queen e7 in this position, and White just started to march the a pawn. Black tried to get some counterplay, but there was no way it was ever going to be enough. And White wrapped up this game very effectively indeed by just concentrating on dark squares and then pushing the A-pawn. It was all too easy for White to win this position. Just a clinical advance. White won. So probably this position is extremely difficult for Black, however it's played. Bishop E6 protects against Queen F7 check, but now C3 consolidating, Knight C5, occupation now. Queen comes to H5, and White's winning pass pawn hits the ground running. Well, whatever Black does here, she's going to struggle to find counterplay. The problem is Black's juggling twin responsibilities of, well, threefold responsibilities of A, getting counterplay, B, defending her king, and C, monitoring this passed pawn. And of course, I think White is just stretching Black all over the board. It's just a question of care. So the king goes into the corner. King H8, A6, A7, very single-minded, very self-explanatory. Rook E1, Bishop G8, takes, Knight A6. This really is simple fair. White's moving in for the kill. Queen D7, and either Black lost on time or finally noticed that White could queen the pawn. So of course in this game Black didn't manage to put up what I would term as serious resistance. But the main point is to draw your attention to another thematic demonstration of what White is trying to achieve. Everything stemmed from the kingside pawn majority, getting that passed pawn in the centre, and after that White was in charge, as you saw.